Hey Anika. So, the cinnamon twists and the little tarts cooked for about 10 minutes. I actually took these guys out a little early because they were getting dark. You don't want them any darker than that. That's actually a little over dark. If you break them over, you'll see that they're quite delicate and flaky, and inside the jam is spread around. The cinnamon twists are likewise. They get a little brown on the bottom. If you break them open, they should be nice and fluffy. Now the thing about the cinnamon twists is they can sometimes be a bit doughy just because they're rather tightly wrapped. The difficulty is that if you cook them long enough to get the doughiness gone, they may burn. So making them a little on the smaller side or the narrower side is, oops, that one got a little overwhelmed. See, this is caramelization. This is the brown sugar caramelized on the bottom. Got a little bit burnt, unfortunately. Now, you'll notice here, parchment paper got a little brown, a little crispy because it was at a high temperature. You do have to keep an eye on it, but it shouldn't catch fire. The caramelized bits of sugar stick to the paper, and when you take it off, the pan is perfectly clean, and it does need to be rinsed to get crumbs off it, but it isn't going to be covered with sticky stuff that is impossible to get off without damaging the coating. This just goes in the garbage, and that's the end of it. So, those are cinnamon twists and jam tarts. When you're making pie, it's a good idea to try making these a couple times just to practice and to get good at the pastry. Now, however, I do want to take the next step and teach you how to make a pie properly so that when you're ready, you know what you're doing. Okay, we'll put that over there. Now, I've measured out the 2 cups of flour and the teaspoon of salt into the bowl. I'll blend it around. I'm going to do this from scratch for you to show you an alternate way of measuring the fat, the Crisco. You will need a 2-cup glass measuring cup with markings up the side. Fill it up to the 1-cup mark with cool water from the tap. Double check at eye level, oops, and a little more, that you indeed have a cup. And when you're assured that you have 1 cup of water in there, you can measure your fat. Now, as you know from other things like science, fat and water repel each other. So you can put a solid fat into the water and it won't blend with it, it'll just float. Now, what can happen with a product like Crisco? Maybe it's been in the fridge for a while and you've used it for a few things like greasing pans and whatnot, and it's gotten a little misshapen. Or maybe you have a big tub of it and it's not as easy to measure. If you want to measure it accurately and it's not in a block, you can just place it in the water like this. Get down to eye level, measure. Now I don't have quite 3/4 of a cup here, I have 2/3 of a cup. But in fact, I want to add a little bit of butter to this anyway for flavor. So I'm going to, shoot. Do I not have any solid? Okay, never mind. I'm not using that. I'm going to be using the fat. I thought I had some. No, I know, but it's too warm, Graham. You can't use the warm stuff. Thank you. Graham was just pointing at the butter that I have on the counter. The reason I can't use that is because it's not chilled. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of this, put it in, and there we have it, 3/4 of a cup. So what I've done is I've just pushed the fat in. The water has come up. When the water reaches the 3/4 cup mark, then I know that I have 3/4 of a cup of fat in there. This is called the water displacement method of measuring. It's very accurate and a useful trick to know when you have to measure a large quantity of fat. Now, take it out of the cup Put it in here. Now, if you recall, I told you to be careful about overworking this, because if you overwork it, it'll become a dense ball, and then the pastry won't be any good. It'll be tough. Okay? So just take your fingers, or if you're using a pastry cutter, use a pastry cutter, and gently work it between your thumb and fingers so that the pastry and the flour, Graham's just stealing one, so that the flour and the fat are blended together. And again, the technique we're using here is called cutting in. Now, we want to make sure that there aren't any huge lumps of fat, because if there are huge lumps of fat, then you'll wind up with fatty melted bits in your pastry, and you don't want that. Okay, now, so, quick review. That's what it's supposed to look like, okay? Push it up the sides of the bowl and add between 4 and 6 tablespoons. A second, I'll just find my tablespoons here in the sink. Between 4 and 6 tablespoons of iced water. And I don't want it to happen last time. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I generally go with 5. You want to use as little water as you possibly can get away with. Now, last time I used a fork. I have a knife handy here, so I'm going to go with a knife. Just going to blend it around a little bit. The purpose of this is to moisten as much of the flour as you possibly can without actually squishing it. The reason you don't want to squish it is because there's a protein in the flour called gluten. Gluten, one of the characteristics of gluten is that if you work it, it will become tough. Now, sometimes you want this. For instance, if you're making biscuits or bread and you want the dough to hold together nicely, then yeah, it makes sense to knead or work the dough in such a way that it will hold together. But it makes the flour, the baked product, somewhat tough if you overwork it. Now, we've got our disc here. Put that there.
Should be preheating it.
Oh, yes. Could you put it on 425 for me, please? Graham? Thanks. Okay. Make 2 discs with your hands. And we will get these rolled out. Now, a word about the pie pan. You'll notice here that I've got a small foil pie pan. It's a 10-inch foil pie pan. These are really good to work with when you're starting out because they're not very big. You can sometimes get larger glass pie pans, such as this one. Okay. You see how this is substantially bigger. It is so much bigger that the dough from these 2 discs will not be enough to fill in the bottom and create a top. So that can be very frustrating. If you're trying to roll out the dough and your pie pan is too big, you're going to get cross because you're never going to be able to fill it up properly. It's better when you're beginning to start with a smaller pan and work with that. Now, we will put this out and get rid of all of this. It's clutter. Don't need the water anymore. Get that out of the way. Okay. Lay out flour. Give yourself some space. Make sure your rolling pin is clear. Put out your first disc. Pat it down pinch around the outsides to keep it from cracking, hopefully. Okay. Now on the rolling pin, remember, don't squish down hard because you'll get lopsided and cracked pastry. Start gently, roll out in small strokes from the center. Keep going. Being careful. Work gently. And try to work fairly quickly if you can. About halfway through, lift it up, move it around to make sure the pastry's there, reflour your pin, and carry on. Now, you want the pastry to be, I don't know, a little less than 1/4 inch in depth. Now you can see that it's cracking a little here. I'm not going to sweat that because when it goes into the pie pan, it's going to fold up. How do you move it? See how it's a little bit delicate? Fold it in half. Put the pie pan here. Lift and slide. And lift it back. Okay? And then you can just sort of gently pull it. See that crack? Just gets pinched in. And we're good to go. It's a little bit stretchy, so you can push it down. And there you go. Now, there's a bit hanging over. Leave that there. You're going to need it in a minute. Now, okay, I'm going to quickly wash my hands. Is that thing pointed at me? I'm going to quickly wash my hands and teach you how to make the apple filling. Okay, hang on a minute. Now, Anika, for a pie this size, you need roughly 5 mid-sized to large apples. Make sure you take off any stickers. Give them a quick rinse to make sure there's no dirt or anything. Even though you're peeling the apple, you still want it to be clean. Now, I didn't want you to have to watch me prepare 5 apples because that's a bit tedious to watch. So ahead of time, I prepared the apples, 4 other apples, put them in a bowl with some water and lemon juice. I'm going to pour that off now. If you're making several pies at a time, or if you want to get ahead of things, you can prepare the apple filling ahead of time. Now, to prepare the apple, you're going to need a cutting board, a knife, a peeler, and of course the clean apple. Take the peeler and peel the apple peel off. If you don't have a peeler, you can use a knife to do this, but you will waste less apple and it's safer to do it this way. So I strongly recommend this one. Most people have a peeler in their home for potatoes and whatnot. Okay, now I'm pulling it towards myself because these safety peelers are not going to cut me. That's a safe thing to do. You wouldn't do this with a knife because you could very easily slip and cut your thumb. But with a safety peeler, it's fine. Set that aside. You can eat it if you feel like it. Now I've got a utility knife here. It's a nice medium-sized knife. And I want to quickly show you how to use it to hold it safely. You want to hold it in your hand like this. You want your index finger here and your thumb here. please don't hold it like this. It's hard on your hand and it's not as safe a grip. If you hold it like this, you're going to have a good grip on your knife. You'll be less likely to slip and cut yourself, and it will give you more force when you're cutting. Now, put it stem side down, cut down this side, turn it around, cut down the other side, cut here, and here, there. That's a nice, quick, easy way to get the bulk of the apple off. You can use the base and just quickly trim off any little bits of peel. The peel won't hurt you. If you want to include the peel in it, then fine, but it's a little bit tough and it gets discolored and brown, so it's not as nice. With the tip of the knife, cut across a few times so that you get some comfortable sized cubes. Put them in the bowl. And slice these up. There. So, what we have here, is approximately 2.5 to 3 cups of chopped apple that are cut into reasonably small, not super fine bits. This is about as small as they are. This is about as large. If you want to, you can cut the apple bigger. It'll take a little longer to cook. I wouldn't cut it any smaller, or you're going to wind up with applesauce in your pie. Now, into this we're going to add some sugar. I'm going to put in 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. I prefer to use just brown sugar with my apple pies. If you want, you can use half and half brown sugar and white sugar. You will need approximately a teaspoon of cinnamon, and about a half a teaspoon, measuring correctly this time, half a teaspoon of salt, and these are Spartan apples. They're a little on the juicy side, so I'm going to put in 3 tablespoons of flour. If you have a drier apple, like a Granny Smith, then perhaps 2 tablespoons will be enough. If you have quite a juicy apple, like a Fuji or a Pink Lady, then you probably want to go with 4. The purpose of the flour is to soak up the juices of the apple and to create a kind of a gravy. Sweet gravy inside the pie. So, blend it up. I've used my hands. If you prefer to use a spoon, then that's fine. There. Put that in like that. The last thing we want to do is add a few dots of butter. I would say roughly 4 little dots of butter. There's about a teaspoon in each of these. We'll add a 5th one. So this butter is going to blend with the flour, and that's what's going to make the kind of sweet gravy that thickens it. Get these out of the way. Now, I'm going to spread out that flour, and I'm going to make the top of the pie. Roll it out exactly the same way you did the other one. Pinch the edges, flour the pin, and gently roll the dough. Now, if you preferred, you could make a kind of topping instead of having a pie crust. You could make a topping out of oatmeal, flour, butter, and brown sugar. It makes it a little bit more like a apple crisp. You can do that. And in some respects, it can be easier to do that. This is not a perfect circle, but it's good enough. I'm going to fold that back, place this here, lift it up, and fold it over. Yeah. There. All right. There's one thing I forgot to do. The pie shells will hold together more easily if you moisten this edge with a little bit of water. It creates a kind of glue. If, like me, you forgot to do that, all you have to do is gently fold it back, spread it on with your fingers, and work your way around. There. All right. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can finish off this pie. The easiest way is to pinch it with a fork. And to do that, you go around like this. Pinch it like that. Okay? And then when you're done with that, you take a sharp knife, this one, and you cut it away. All right? In fact, given that that's the easiest way to finish it off, I think that's what I'm going to do with you right now, rather than fussing around with fancy fluted finishes. Okay? This will seal it nicely. Now, sometimes what will happen, I'm going to just wreck this a little bit because I want to show you how to fix something. Sometimes when you're rolling it out, especially when you're starting out, you wind up with a piece of pastry that is more like an amoeba than a circle. And what do you do if that's the case? You really don't want this hole here because the gravy is going to leak out and make a big mess. So what you do is you just kind of take a bit of water, make yourself a patch with some of the other pastry that you have. Lay it down. Admittedly, it doesn't look as nice, but when you're a beginner, it's better than having to roll the whole thing out all over again. So I'm just going to take it all the way around. And pinch it down with the fork. There. So it's a little raggedy, but that's okay. It'll hold together. It'll taste great. The very last thing you want to do is vent it. You always want to vent your pie because the steam and whatnot from the apples needs to escape. If it doesn't, the pie crust can be damaged. Okay. Now, one of the things that you might want to consider doing is putting the pie on a pan so that if the gravy does come out, it's caught by the pan rather than getting and messing up the bottom of your oven. It also makes it easier to get it in and out of the oven. It's safer to move it like this. So it's a good idea to put it on a cookie sheet or a pan of some kind. The oven is at 425. I'm going to put it in for 10 minutes and then I'm going to turn it to 375 and cook it for another 20 to 25 minutes, depending on how thick this pie is. So, one more time. 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. Then turn it down to 375 and cook it for 20 to 25 minutes more. Okay, so we'll let that cook, and in a few minutes when it comes out of the oven, we'll turn the camera on one more time so you can see what it's supposed to look like. Thanks, Anika. I hope you have fun making your pie.